Hello.
So today's video, we're tackling the question of, is memorizing words the same as reading words, or just reading in general?
Right.
This question came up because someone was describing a high-level reader in the Rita community group, but this child really had no writing or spelling skills.
Right.
So
and
this
of course
brought up this topic.
Right. And the thing is, this isn't the first time this comes up. We see this often.
Yes.
And so one of the things we want you to know is, what is the answer to that question?
The short answer is no. Memorizing words is not reading.
Even though it can seem like that's
true. It can
true.
seem like it, but it isn't. And there's some things we have to tease out, so we'll do our best here. True reading, the research reading science shows, always involves a process in our brains called phonological processing, which is kind of more colloquially referred to as tracking sounds. So even when you're reading very short, small, simple words, you are always accessing that area of your brain and tracking the sounds across those words if you are actually reading. So
we just become very fast and
yes.
efficient in doing that, so we don't think about the fact that that's actually going on.
And we'll get to that distinction coming up. But basically, if your child has no ability to read an unfamiliar word, then they're not really reading, even those words that are very familiar to them. That's what we call word attack skills. If they really don't have word attack skills, which really refers to what are their skills that they draw upon when they come to a word they don't know, or that is unfamiliar to them, right? Then they're probably memorizing a lot of words or guessing on a lot of words as opposed to actually reading.
Right, and we call actual reading decoding because there is a code, the sound to letter code, and they are decoding. So how do we know if maybe our children are guessing rather than, or memorizing rather than reading? It's easy to see in the early reading stage where kids, have these simple books and they could read the whole book to you without even looking at the words because, cat sat on mat, right? And they could read that whole thing without even looking at the book. And we know now they've just memorized it. They often look like they're ahead of their peers.
Yeah, this is a bit of a warning.
Yeah. They can look really fast, very fluent. They seem to be strong readers. And so people are feeling like they almost feel self-taught. They're just really good at memorizing words, and they're applying that strategy. So that's one of the things that can give you an idea that maybe we want to see how well are those reading skills over time. And what do they sound like when they read aloud more complex kinds of reading text?
Right. So we're going to try to help you tease this out. If you have a child who seems to be a really strong reader, reads really fast, almost seems like they taught themselves and you didn't have to do much. You want to make sure, are they really reading or have they just memorized a lot of words?
Right.
So signs of a child who's memorizing words, we'll just kind of go back and forth here. One is that they may read sort of the beginning, especially with longer words. They may read the beginning of the word and then kind of guess at the rest.
And unfortunately, there are reading programs out there that have been teaching children to do this, but that's just guessing. That's not, and that's trying to memorize what words look like. That's not actually reading. The other thing is that when they read aloud, you might notice they're very inaccurate in these small function words. The, whether it's he, him, you'll see these little words that either are misread, skipped. They don't seem to matter very much, but really they're not doing very accurate tracking across the text.
Sometimes they preserve the content and the general context of what sort of is the message on the page, but when you actually look at the accuracy of the words that they're reading, it's not so great. So they misread a lot of words, even though the main message might have been correct.
Right. If we give a child who's a memorizer nonsense words, they would have difficulty reading nonsense words because they don't really know the code. That word doesn't look like anything they know. It's not familiar. And they're going to try to guess at real words instead of actually being able to sound out
unfamiliar real words.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or they may even think it's, maybe it's this. It looks like, that word, but they can't actually read the nonsense word.
Yeah, actually, when I say unfamiliar, I don't mean it's a word they've never heard before, but I mean it's a word that they might not be used to seeing a lot on the page.
Right.
Yeah, and then they can't break words into parts. So that kind of goes along with what Rita was just saying. They basically don't have decoding skills. So when all of us come across a word that we don't know in text, which happens to everyone, there's a heck of a lot of vocabulary out there.
Right.
What is your strategy? What do you do to read a word you don't know? If you have no strategy and it's just like, well, I've never seen that word, so I guess I'm out, then you're memorizing words you're not reading.
Yeah, we like to say adults who don't realize they actually are using these skills, just try to pick up a prescription drug and read that name of the technical name of the drug, and you immediately start using these decoding. Yeah, right. You have to start using your decoding skills. Yeah, I don't even know if that. Yeah, she just made that up. The last thing is you'll see poor spelling. So initially, again, these kids can look like they're good spellers because they've memorized cat and sat and hat and dog and all these little
Boy
words
and girl.
they have memorized, and they might keep their sentences very structured to these simple words that they have memorized. But to actually, try to encode and attack how you might spell a word, they don't really have skills for
I'm
that.
going to add one too. If you ask these kids to say sounds as they write, they often fight you and do not like it.
No, because that's just not the process they're using.
It's not what they've ever done.
Right,
yeah.
They don't apply sound.
Right,
Okay.
right. So there is a difference between memorizing words and developing what we call word form memory, which is something that we use when we read and spell accurately, strongly. And it involves the word memory, so it's a little confusing. But word form memory basically is the idea of this fast mapping of words that have been decoded by you accurately many times. So we have kind of a lexicon that we develop over time of words that are super familiar because we see them and read them and spell them and write with them all the time, that now we just read them so quickly that we don't need to like go back to sounding out every individual sound or even each individual syllable, right? Does that mean I'm not accessing the sound centers in my brain though? Absolutely not. So research has shown that words that have become word forms in our brain still are always, your brain is always tracking sounds when you read those words. It's just doing it super quickly that they've become these quick word forms.
Right, and you can handle those words when you add different prefixes and suffixes onto them, or multiple suffixes onto them, because you know generally how that word works and how words are put together. And so you have to be tracking sounds and word parts to do that. We're not just memorizing whole words. The difference between decode and decodable, we don't memorize those as two separate words. Those are words that we understand how to track across and how to create those words. And I could see a word that has different suffixes on it that I've never seen before, and I still can decode that because I know how the whole system works.
Exactly. So word form memory is really important for developing what we call fluency in reading, right? So when we say decode, we don't want you to think that in order to be a good reader, you must always sound like the, at. We don't do that. We develop this fluency because we are able to, after having done a lot of that decoding in those early stages, get those fast word forms. So an example of a student who's memorized and is not using word form memory, but is in fact memorizing, will mix up and misread words that appear to be very similar, but they're not actually tracking closely across those sounds, even if it was fast because they had a word form for it, like form versus from. We see that kind of mistake all the time. Receive versus relieve. Words that look almost exactly alike, but still require you to be accurately tracking sounds for you to not make those kinds of errors.
Right. So why does this matter? Well, you might already guess from us talking about when you start seeing these more complex words, kids will hit a wall. We have limited capacity for how many things we can memorize. But if we understand a code, we can apply that code across the board. And, they've even done some studies with people learning languages with alphabets or writing systems that they don't know. The difference between teaching the code and how quickly people learn to read and write in the new language versus having them just memorize a set of words.
Right.
And if you've ever tried to learn a second language, you know that if you can get into the code, you do a lot better with it. Now you can read words you've never even seen before instead of just memorizing a word list. So we have limited capacity. It impedes our progress over time. It's not really the way reading works. So, you're now using a system that's not efficient. So,
Right.
of course, that becomes tiresome. Sometimes down the road, this child who started out looking like this great reader ends up being someone who doesn't really enjoy reading, because it's actually quite taxing cognitively
Cognitive load.
to try to constantly be memorizing words as you go.
Right.
And the biggest thing is it does not support spelling and writing. Again, at the very beginning, it can look like these kids can write a lot of words, but it doesn't play out over time. When they're creating original writing, they're limited in this set of words that they can use. And so it really impedes their progress going forward.
When reading is happening accurately and efficiently, it's always building into our writing skills, right? If it's not happening accurately and efficiently, it has nothing to do with our writing skills and is therefore not helping your writing progress.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
All
I
right.
think we covered that.
Hope that helps. Bye.
Bye.